All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 36th episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. Angela had to help me out with that one. And here for my very special guest, as you can see, is Angela from Literature Science Alliance. Hello, Angela. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a nice day here in Boston, which is kind of nice. The weather's been all over the place, as I'm sure it's been for you on the East Coast as well. It's just super
Yes.
warm one day and then really cold the next.
Yeah, actually, we're not that far away from each other for booktube friends. A lot of people I know are all over the world, but you and I are in the Northeast, and I've been to Boston a couple times, and it's a great city. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not a local. I mean, I guess I've almost been living here for a decade now, but I do like it as cities go.
yeah. I mean, as cities go, if you've been there for a decade, you're kind of a local, I guess, right?
Yeah, it is kind of weird because I mean, like all cities, I only know my corner as well, and Boston's not even a large city, but like I know my
No.
boroughs.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great city. It has a lot of, for an American city, a city in the United States, it has a fair amount of history in it. So, yeah. I like Boston.
It's such a walker's city. That's why I liked it. And like
Yeah,
people are always reading on the train, so you always feel like you're with fellow book nerds, which is how I
yeah,
got back into reading was taking the train to work. It's like I'm done listening to all of my music. I need to read again.
yeah, cool. Yeah, of course, I live closer to New York myself, and they're in many realms kind of rival cities, although they're very different size. New York's a much bigger city, but I think in sports, a lot of times it's the New York-Boston rivalry that gets people going. Yeah.
I mean, I have no Boston sports affiliation except for the hockey team because I'm from Cleveland and Cleveland doesn't have a hockey team.
Okay.
But Cleveland is culturally where I feel more at home.
Uh-huh. I get
So
it. Yeah.
Cavs, Guardians, Browns, no matter how sad they make me, that's where I'm
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have strong ties to most sports, and tennis is not like a team sport.
But
So,
tennis is so fun to watch.
oh yeah, I mean, I play it a lot more than I watch it, honestly, but I do like to watch it and be in awe of what the professionals can do. I mean, it's
They
just,
have to think and move so fast. I'm like, this it's like watching a really intense game of chess. I really like watching tennis.
yeah, cool. Awesome. Yeah. So we are actually not here to talk about sports, although that's a fine topic if we want to talk about it. But we're here to talk books and reading journey and all that fun stuff. And maybe we can get into why you started your channel and what it's all about. I am curious though, before I ask you my standard question, and I know you've told this before, but perhaps some people in my audience wouldn't have heard it. Why did you choose to call your channel Literature Science Alliance?
I mean, I have a PhD in biophysics. When I started the channel, I didn't have the PhD yet, but I was like 5 years into the
Yeah.
program. And
Yeah,
I don't
and
know,
you
when I
need to
first,
change your description on your about page because it says you're a grad student still.
that's true. I should do that. Like, that's a thing I haven't touched since 2020. Should
Yeah.
definitely be better at that. Marketing is not my strong suit, which is why when I decided, all right, I'm going to make a YouTube channel, I asked my like marketing friend for channel name ideas. And
Yeah.
that was one she came up with. And I'm like, cool. And I didn't realize how hard it would be for people to say, but I'm kind of locked in at this point.
Yeah. I like it. I like the name a lot. So,
Yeah.
but what does it convey? I mean, other than the fact that you have a PhD in what discipline now?
Biophysics.
Biophysics.
Yeah,
Okay.
my undergrad's in physics, and then biophysics is my upper grad. I don't know. My graduate degree is biophysics.
Okay. So you're gonna have to explain to me and maybe some other people what is biophysics.
I mean, at its core, it's biology and physics meshed together. It's the idea of looking
Okay.
specifically, I went to a medical school for science, so we were looking at medical questions in trying to study it. So the biology, right, of the body and using physics tools to answer some questions. So for me specifically, we all
Okay.
know about cholesterol. We were looking at how our good cholesterol is made there's like a protein machine in our body that makes good cholesterol. And my project was, what does this thing look like? And to look at it, we had to use physics tools. So it's kind of an
Wow.
interdisciplinary thing.
That
So
is
that's what got
really
it.
cool. And you'd have to be good at biology and physics, it sounds like. So in other words, you have to be really smart to do biophysics, I guess.
Or, really patient with yourself. A lot of the PhDs,
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you know, is perseverance and patience and
Yeah.
grace.
Yes, that is true. And mine is in the humanities, English literature PhD. So, but I would say that definitely applies
Yeah.
as
There's
well.
just there's a lot of how strong are you mentally, not necessarily intelligent, just
Very true. I think persistence, endurance is in the end way more important than just raw talent in most realms. Yeah.
yeah, and like especially so I'm not in the humanities, but for research, it's different being good at understanding science versus thinking of new questions and how to answer those questions. They're not the same skill.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm better at one of those skills than the other, which is more the communicating science. I really like communicating science. And
Okay.
early in my channel, I did incorporate more science into it, but then I got burnt out in my science life and I didn't want it in my hobby life.
Okay. Fair
And I
enough.
haven't quite come around yet to being like ready to do a project again like that because it's a lot of work.
Oh, I'd imagine. Yeah. So where's the literature come in then? Obviously, you have a channel and you talk about books and of all sorts, but you've done a lot of fantasy, of course, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I look at my stats, I think 60% of what I read is fantasy and science fiction, and half of each is fantasy and science fiction. I give both equal-ish love. I don't plan that, but it happens.
So 30
But
and
I do
30.
read a lot of literary fiction. Like each year, I usually read 20 to 30 literary fiction books. I read historical fiction, contemporary, not as much, and romance, not as much. Not that I don't love them. It's just, there's only so much time in a year, and I really like fantasy and science fiction because
Yeah.
what I grew up with, and I find a lot of fun conversations in those books.
Cool. When you do read the science fiction, are you ever, because you're a scientist, are you ever like, actually, no, that doesn't work that way? Or are you able to just be absorbed and go with the flow?
It depends on the author, and it depends on how pompous I think the author's being. Like if the author is just having fun, I let them have fun. I'm like, oh, we're just here to have a good time. I can suspend my disbelief. Let's go. But like, for example, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, I really dislike
Oh,
because,
okay.
well, because it's a soft sci-fi book. It's almost magical realism in what is speculatively happening. And I won't talk about it because I know people are like, it's a thriller. I don't want to know anything. That's
Right.
fair.
Yeah.
But when I read it, I'm like, but you're using all of the hard sci-fi words. You're pretending you have done your research to play in the hard sci-fi space with the words you're using. And
Yeah.
that is like Doctor Who does this better, and Doctor Who's not pretending to make sense.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, it would be tough. I think an author like that, and I have not read anything by Blake Crouch yet. I've heard Blake Crouch compared to, oh gosh, who's the author of Eaters of the Dead? And
I lump him with Andy Weir, but I don't
Crichton,
know.
Crichton, Michael Crichton.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Similar type of author, I guess, and incorporating science in a lot of the books that they write, but
I've
maybe in a
only
not deeply convincing way. If you're a real scientist, you can see the holes, maybe.
So I read Jurassic Park early on in
Yes.
grad school, and
Yeah.
I actually think Jurassic Park's understanding of what we knew about genetics at the time he wrote the book is actually pretty solid.
Wow. Okay.
So I mean, it's don't learn your science from a thriller sci-fi book, but that's the rule. It's science fiction, which is my thing. I'd want to give them the space to be fictitious, to think about the what ifs, to have fun.
Yeah.
It's just when like I feel like they're taking themselves seriously and obviously didn't do rigorous research that
Uh-huh.
I get like a little like annoyed.
Okay.
Mainly
Okay.
because like then people read it and they think that they give it more credence than like say other sci-fi books that have done a lot of work. Like the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin is like a
Yes.
sci
Yes.
fantasy that's done a lot of its homework, but it
Yeah.
is not nearly as popular as beloved as some of these other like quick, easy, get it at the airport sci-fi books. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I love the Broken Earth trilogy. It's one of the first videos I made for my channel. I sat down with my older daughter and had a discussion on it. And I'm actually totally unaware of how convincing that's a side of it that I've never really looked into. But you're saying that N.K. Jemisin did her homework. And so a lot of the science feels
Yeah.
convincing to you in there.
Well, yeah, obviously there's magic in that book. So that part's like
Yes.
we're just
Yes.
having fun. But when she's doing all of the earth stuff, the geology things, like
Yeah.
she did a lot of research. Like I'm not a geologist, so like I'm also not being here like knowing a lot in that field. But when I read her blogs on what she did to like incorporate, and that's the thing too, an author who does their research also knows what they're allowed to break. and still have things make sense. And I think that's the key, is if you know what you can break without making things completely fall apart, it's more fun. Because
Yeah.
their job is still to break reality in speculative fiction. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So since you are a scientist, I'm going to take you as an authority here.
oh
And I had this friendly debate with my friend AP Canavan about the Broken Earth trilogy specifically, which then and other people have been less friendly about it, frankly. Sometimes people say, oh, you're full of it. This is obviously blank, you know. I tend to think of Broken Earth as more fantasy because it does have magic, like you said, whereas my friend AP is, no, it's science fiction. Where do you stand on this? And again, some people seem to get very upset about these things, but I think it's a fun little question to think about.
I think it's a fun conversation, but I also, at its core, hate genre delineations as I keep reading fantasy and sci-fi, especially
Yeah.
when you get into modern speculative space, especially with authors like N.K. Jemisin, Rivers Solomon, Octavia Butler. Like, they weren't trying to be in a box because being in the box wasn't going to get them published anyways. And so they're pulling from a lot of different spaces. It reads to me trope-wise like a fantasy book.
Okay.
I am more inclined to give it to a fantasy reader than a hard sci-fi reader, although I'd give it to anyone who I think could handle the heavy content and the second person point of view sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, but it is speculative. That's why I like that word now, because I can just even put horror in there and not really care.
Yeah. So I'm just interpreting that as I'm right and AP's wrong. Thank you.
Sure, I can give you that. Yeah, I can say that you're right. That's fine. I mean, I do think trope-wise, it has more of what we're used to in a fantasy Western story. You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's also true, I think, of Dune and Star Wars as well, which, you know,
Star Wars is definitely fantasy in my head.
Some people would, okay, good, because I'm kind of with you, and I know a lot of people are going to get upset at us because of this. They're going to stop watching the video right now. But actually, fantasy, if you're talking about tropes and you're talking about just pure plot, and honestly, the Force in the original trilogy, the Force is magic. It's magic. I know in the subsequent prequel thing, they tried to give it a veneer of science with the midichlorians, and nobody likes it.
You can even put that in like a hard magic system. Like, it doesn't even have to be science anymore.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Star Wars also, it falls apart if you approach it as sci-fi, at least for me. Like, if I think of it as fantasy, I have more fun. But like, when I think of it as sci-fi, it's like, I would rather be watching Star Trek right now in terms of like older classic sci-fi media. Right. I have more fun there.
Yeah.
Because it's more ideas focused. It has more of the trappings I'm used to, which is a box within itself, right? But there are trappings I'm used to around a sci-fi story.
Okay. Yeah, you are preaching to the choir here. I'm so in agreement with you on this. And so Star Trek is clearly science fiction to me. And whereas Star Wars is really fantasy with some science fiction trappings and there's spaceships and stuff, you know. But
well, and then like I always just get annoyed at what things we automatically use to define genres. It's like, okay, it's in space, so it's automatically sci-fi. It's like, wait, why can't fantasy be in space? Why do we have these rules? Why can't fantasy be in the future? Why can't there be, like, I don't understand.
Right. Yeah. So just to get us in more trouble, do you think the Dune then is also more fantasy, or is it sci-fi, or is it sci-fantasy, as some people like to say?
So I have to answer this saying I've only read the first book.
Okay, fair. Me too, actually. I've only read the first book.
And I know things get weird down the line in that series, and maybe that would change my mind. Like, I don't know a lot of spoilers, but like I know covers of books, you know, like even that, it's just like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
I do think that one, it's definitely sci-fantasy, but it is so foundational for a lot of the space opera genre that it defines a lot of the tropes we now associate with harder space opera. So it's harder for me because it is more culturally focused. And whenever things get extra culturally focused, that is like, I mean, Asimov and everyone have been doing that for so long, it falls more that way. But like the spice and everything like that, definitely, it's hard too, because like Dune also inspired a lot of Wheel of Time, which is, you know, a huge series that inspires a lot of modern fantasy. So it's like, if we're going to say any book's a 50-50, it might be that one.
Okay.
Like, cool. It's really hard because it is so foundational, but it's also a direct, if we say Star Wars is fantasy, it's a direct like progenitor to Star Wars.
Yeah, so. In many ways, it really is. Yeah. Okay, so none of these boundaries, these labels hold up, in other words, all the
I
time.
mean, I think the labels are useful in that if they help the person find their book, great. For me,
Yeah.
labels no longer help me as much finding a book. So I go with writing style a lot, which is not
Yeah.
something people talk about as much in reviews. So
Yeah, absolutely. And some of my favorite authors, definitely, like N.K. Jemisin, do blend the two pretty freely. Mark Lawrence is another one who does that a lot. He's a scientist like you, and I think he knows physics too.
one day I have to give him another chance. I did the foolish thing of starting in publication order, and
Uh-huh.
I DNF'd before I knew what that meant. It was like 6 years ago. I picked up, is it Prince of Thorns is the first one?
That's the Broken Empire trilogy, which is very much grimdark.
I mean,
It's
I can read Grimdark. I've read R. Scott Baker and stuff. It was more
okay.
I was more bored. It was more
Uh-huh.
just a boredom. I was just like, everything is
Yeah.
edgy and dark, and I don't know who this person is really, and I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I recommend for a lot of people to start with the trilogy that I just read, which is the one that begins with Red Sister, the
Yeah, Book of the
Book of the
Ancestor.
Ancestor. Yeah, that I suspect that might be more to your taste. But you know, that's I think that's going to have a broader audience, and it's a beautiful story as well, and it does have some sciencey elements. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on. There's some physics in there, even. So yeah, so cool. But let's get back to that question that I like to ask people, which is going on the theory that you are what you read. Which let's not look too closely at that theory, but going on that theory that you are what you read, what are some of the important reads of your lifetime? And going all the way back to little Angela back in Cleveland, and some of the books that you considered to be foundational, formative for you, up to even the point where you started this channel of yours.
Sure. I mean, I've been lucky to be in a family of readers, so the reading habit was always encouraged. So, even if we didn't have a lot of money, we went to used bookstores, went to the library. So like I was always had books. My mom reminds me of when I was 2 and there were books in the crib and stuff. So like there's a lot of books. But I guess Bailey School Kids is the little kid chapter books that got me into like the habit of reading, and I love them. I don't know if anyone remembers them, but it's like teachers can't like vampires can't wear polka dots is the first book, and they all think that their teacher is a vampire. It's all
Yes.
these kids
Yeah.
thinking every adult in their life is supernatural, like their swim instructor, the lifeguard's a mermaid, and it was just a fun little time like that. So that was my little
My
kid.
daughters read those, so I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
They're really fun. I remember vividly when because my mom read to me, so a lot of my formative books were read to me for a long time, like Little House on the Prairie, Lion,
Oh,
the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The first 4 Harry Potters she read to me.
okay.
Because I was born in '92, so I once the 5th book came out, I started reading them all, and I reread the first 4 like bajillion times. And Junie B. Jones, that was
Oh,
big.
okay.
And then who's the author who wrote Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing? That was a big book for me.
Oh, that rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you.
I think Dear like there was a Letters to God or something by the same author, but like Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing and Matilda, I remember reading one
uh,
summer in Venezuela, and I love those. So those are all like my young kid books. And I read this is like an obscure thing I found at the library. They were called Big Red. There were 3 books about this like red Irish dog. And they were like these huge leather bound books, and I don't know what
okay.
they were about.
Wow.
But they were
It
about this
wasn't
Irish
Clifford. It
setter.
wasn't Clifford. You're talking about a
No, it
different
was
big red dog.
about a hunting dog that like always pointed, and like I don't know, it was a dog book, so it might have gotten sad and I blocked it out. I don't know, because I also read like Jack London's books.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Call of the Wild and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
Basically, I just read whatever was in the library that looked like it was in a series, because I do think that reading like the series books, the Bailey School Kids, made me want to read series. Like, so I was always a voracious series reader. And I
Okay.
read, there's this other not a YA, middle grade sci-fi series called Replicas, where this woman finds out she's like one of 12 clones. I read a lot of weird things. It was right next to Animorphs at the bookstore. I
So it
never
sounds
read
like
Animorphs.
early on you were inclined toward speculative fiction, science-y kind of things. It sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
But the one that was probably the most formative that I didn't realize till I got my physics degree, because there were things I read before I knew what physics was His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman.
Oh, yes, I
That
love that.
was my big one. That was after I read Harry Potter. We had something called a Joseph Beth bookstore, which did not make it long, but it was one of a chain that tried. And
Okay.
I was like, I like Harry Potter. What should I read? And they gave me Golden Compass and Aragon. And I thought I would like Aragon. And
Uh-huh.
Aragon was fine.
Yeah.
But I've never been, it's my biggest crime as a fantasy lover. I've never liked the farm boy chosen one narrative that is so by the book. Like
Yeah.
it's quest fantasy. Those tropes have just never spoken to me, probably because I grew up in school settings so much, even with Bailey school kids. Like I liked the claustrophobic settings,
Yeah.
not the sprawling settings.
But even Harry Potter obviously fits with that too. Yeah.
And like the seventh book's not my favorite because we leave the school and
They
like,
go all wandering. Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere. And so, but His Dark Materials, I didn't like Golden Compass as much because it's more middle grade travel story. But then once we
Uh-huh.
got to Subtle Knife and Amber Spyglass, I was so in. And I've read it multiple times as an adult. And like as an adult, my last time reading it, I'm like, oh, this is sci fantasy. What is happening?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you feel that I don't completely understand, other than the fact that the protagonist or protagonists are kids, why this book has been given the YA label. I mean, I feel like I read it with my older daughter when she was, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years old. And she loved it. But I also loved it. And I thought, this isn't just a kid's book at all. There's a lot in here. There's a lot of nods to Milton's Paradise Lost. There's a lot of theology in here. There's a lot of philosophy. It's a really deep trilogy, don't you think?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I really liked about it, especially because, like I said, I read it after Harry Potter, but I was about the same age. I think I was 13-ish. Like, I think I was the age of the characters throughout the trilogy when I read it.
Yeah.
And it was one of the first series I read that treated me like a human who can handle stakes. Like when you read a lot of kids' books, there's plot armor, there's a lot of shielding, there's a lot of pretending that we're going to get to the climax and there will be loss, but then there's a deus ex machina that fixes it. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, you've read His Dark Materials. It's like the end of it is very bittersweet. And like my
Oh,
mom actually hates it because of the ending. And me, it's like, no, that was really important to me
Yeah.
to like see these characters handle this situation. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I mean, I don't know why it's published the way it is. I mean, it's censored in a weird way for the US editions too versus the original UK. So I don't know if it's just like they do weird things with it across publishing. They
Yeah.
never know where to put it.
Yeah. I don't feel like it should be boxed into the YA bin there. I just don't think it. I mean, I'm fine, obviously, with younger people picking it up because obviously they do connect with it. But I think there's a lot going on that is going to, certainly when I was 12, that would have gone over my head, I think. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that it appeals to a broad audience. And I actually don't know because, like I said, it was originally published in the UK, and the UK publishing, especially back when this came up, I don't know how big their young adult section was. And I think that's another thing is when this book came out, our young adult sections were really just starting to bloom because of Harry Potter and then Aragon and stuff
yeah.
like that. So it was always been there, but it wasn't as big. And once you cross-publish across things, I think publishers don't always know where to put it to get it its most money. Because I think that's the thing is it's all about marketing, right? It's not actually about sitting down and figuring out who is the perfect audience for this book. That's not what publishers are doing. And I don't know if Philip Pullman sat down and was like, this is for 13-year-olds. Like, I don't know if that was his thought process.
Yeah, I doubt it very much. I think you're right that it was Harry Potter exerting a huge influence in people looking for the next YA and finding the stuff that they could possibly label YA, and somehow it got thrown in with all that. But have you read Pullman's most recent trilogy that he started?
I'm nervous about it, mainly because like I find the first trilogy so contained in such a satisfying way.
Yeah.
Maybe once it's finished, I'll give it a try. I'll try it out, see what I think. But it's an odd trilogy too, because from my understanding, the first book's a prequel for everything, how Lyra gets to Oxford.
Yeah.
And then the second book is after the trilogy where she's going to school. And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm interested in what that means, but also people say that like they get frustrated with the second book with her and Pan's relationship. And I just get nervous. I'm just like, I liked the journey of the 3 books.
Yeah, sometimes I hear you. You've read that older story and it's sacred and it's kind of in your mind finished, and now you're a bit nervous about taking up where it left off, or that does sound a little unnerving perhaps, but I'll probably check it out eventually. I want to reread the original trilogy. I read it once and many years ago, so
I gave it to my partner to read when the show started, and he's in his 30s, and he really liked it. So it does transcend age in a really unique way. And like, there's a lot of discourse around Harry Potter and its longevity and nostalgia and all of that. But ignoring all of the political stuff around Harry Potter, for me, just on a book story level, His Dark Materials is a book I've reread as an adult multiple times, and I haven't reread Harry Potter as an adult because the holes just keep getting bigger for me in Harry Potter that always bothered me as a kid. Whereas His Dark Materials is just like, it just works for my brain.
Yeah. No, I'm very comfortable with the YA label for Harry Potter. And I read it as an adult because I was an adult when it came out. And I was always taking it in that spirit of, if I wanted to really look seriously at this and look at all the little holes and problems, we could do that. But I'm just having fun with this, so.
Well, and like, I liked Harry Potter when it was more the middle grade part of it, the first 4. And the latter 3, when they just decided that editing was optional, I was like, I was a kid who liked reading those books. And I'm like, this 5th book is 1,000 pages for why?
Yeah. I have to say, I do like the first 3 books the most as well. I read with interest the 4, 5, 6, and 7, but 4 is definitely where things get more serious. Yeah.
And I do think I was like the target audience. Like, I read the 7th book when I was 14. So I feel like I was the target audience. That book came out when I was 14. Yeah. And I was just like, it's called The Deathly Hallows. I feel like you can't spoil it, The Deathly Hallows or anything. If they were that important, we should have known about them way earlier. Like, I just think that her ability to world build and plot was just not even close to my minimal standards.
Yeah. It was, I think, a lot of things sort of just added in and sort of a hodgepodge of stuff. And the more serious it got, the more maybe problematic that was. Whereas when they were more whimsical and that sort of thing in the earlier ones, you didn't mind that sort of thing so much, I guess, right? So
and I was way younger. And there's pretty much almost a direct exchange of, I think that 2007, so 2 years before that too, I guess another formative thing, 2005, so I'm 12 or 13, maybe I'm 13 going on 14, I picked up Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. And I'm a big Sanderson fan, and he was the author that reminded me that, reading can be fun again, because a lot of required reading at that time was really weighing me down. I read a lot of things that are outside of the age range in 7th and 8th grade. Like, I read Memoirs of a Geisha, I read Wicked. None of those things are like kids' books.
Not really, yeah.
No. My mom was just like, she read them first, and she's like, okay, if you want to talk about any of the scenes in this book, let me know. And just because there are some explicit sex scenes in those books.
Right. Yeah.
So Sanderson was what reminded me that fantasy is so fun. And like, for me, it was so new how rigorous his systems were. And so then I had something that was very world building consistent, maybe overly consistent, right? Maybe there's not enough whimsy, but then to go back to the whimsy was like, this is too broken sort of thing.
Do Sanderson's elaborate magic systems appeal to you as a scientist, or do you have to sort of turn off your science brain and say, I'm just going to enjoy this as a fun thing? Because they are a huge part. I've only read the first Mistborn trilogy and the first 3 books of Stormlight Archive, and I enjoyed them very much. And I think he's a fun writer, and I admire the way he incorporates magical systems into the plot, making them part of the journey of discovery for the characters and the reader simultaneously. I think that's pretty brilliant, actually. So as a scientist reading these, how do you disengage the science brain, or do you say, aha, that's interesting?
I don't disengage it. I might not have it always like on per se, but what's interesting is, so I read Sanderson before I became a scientist. I was always scientifically inclined. Like, as a kid, I was always like, why are the leaves green on the tree? And I learned about, chlorophyll and stuff. Like, I was always inquisitive. But with Sanderson, he knows when he's breaking a rule, and it's done in a way that doesn't jar me. And I think that's the thing. It doesn't unimmerse me. It doesn't jar me, so everything's fine. But I actively have fun when I notice things in his books that are like actually very accurate. For example, I read Way of Kings the first time when I was a high schooler, and then I reread it when I was in college after I'd learned quantum mechanics. and there's an interlude that I'm like, oh my goodness, this is quantum mechanics. This is like the perfect representation of quantum mechanics. And I was
Oh, how
geeking
cool.
out.
Huh.
So I geek out. And then Rhythm of War, which you said you hadn't read, there's stuff happening scientifically with one of the characters who's a scientist. And
Yes,
I
I
was,
know who that is. Yeah.
yeah, but stuff's happening with her. And I was thinking, oh, I bet they're going to do this. Sanderson, are you going to do this to solve this problem? Is that, and it was. And I was just like, that is the accurate way of doing it. That's so fun.
Okay. Okay. So you were the reader who really liked those parts, whereas I
Yeah.
did hear some people were like, "Can we please not get into how fabrioles are made so in such detail and all that sort of thing?" But you're the one saying, "Oh, this is cool." Is that
Yeah,
right?
no, I mean, for me, I totally get when the Cosmere doesn't work for people. I'm definitely, I mean, I don't think any book series is for anyone. But for me, there is a cozy quality in that I've been with it for so long. I've almost been reading Sanderson for 20 years. Like
Yeah.
there is a comfort factor. I'm used to how he writes. There's a certain way he does character arcs that I like, can see from a mile away now, like there's a comfort to it. And there are other things that I think people love in Stormlight that I'm just like, I'm good. I think Oathbringer is an incredibly too long book. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm just like I'm exhausted by the time I get to the end. And I'm like, I don't think he handles political questions in a way I find as compelling as other authors.
He
So
could
when
go a
he
little
decides,
further, I think. He
I
could
think
probe a little further, maybe.
he finds the what I think is the most boring, easy answer, and then spends way too long fleshing it out. Does that make sense? Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, I can agree with that. I think that he's aware of where his audience is for the most part and is willing to go, he does some interesting things. He explores disability, he
Yeah,
explores depression, and he does to some degree, I think, in Stormlight Archive, look at otherizing and that sort of thing, but he could go much further, I think, with what he set up, at least if he wanted to. But I guess that's not what he wants to do. I think he's aware of what he's doing. I think the guy knows what he's doing.
yeah. I mean, for me specifically, it's the government systems that I'm getting a little like
Uh-huh.
uninterested in. Like bored's not the right word. They were never the reason I picked up a Sanderson anyways, but like you've read Mistborn and Stormlight, and I'm like, this is
Yeah.
the same thought experiment twice. How have
Uh-huh.
we not changed up the thought experiment? Or, it's like I get it, you're looking at our history and we are basing it off, feudalism that we've like I understand that some things, if you're choosing to ground it in things that have happened before, there are certain natural outcomes, but it's also
Yeah.
a fantasy book and you can make your own rules and your own starting points.
Yeah.
Like so,
Yeah.
I mean, but that's not why I read Sanderson. So it's like a nitpick, but it's not like
Yeah.
it's not breaking it for me. I still like he's for sure my most read author. So like I own
Well,
so
I
much.
think we all of us fantasy fans should feel some gratitude to Sanderson because the fact that he's brought so many people into the genre. I think
Yeah.
he's done a really great service to fantasy. So I definitely appreciate his work just from that perspective. And I don't care if people call it YA or adult or whatever, or I don't these categories don't always really make a lot of sense to me. They are a little more, they're not as adult as some other series, let's say, but that's fine, and he does what he does really well, and he's obviously pretty savvy at doing it, I think. So
Yeah, he's very good, I think, business right man and author, which I don't think there's many that are really good at
that's
both of those
true.
facets.
Yeah, most authors are probably terrible business minds. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't think for me, I kind of miss the days where he wasn't as popular, but you always want people to succeed in their art. But like, I do miss the days where it was like he was just a very best-selling author. Like he's at another level now.
Well, and I was talking to someone just recently about this, how Sanderson has actually kind of, I wouldn't say accidentally, but he's become an interesting part of the whole landscape of modern publishing in that he's become a self-publishing author of a sort. I mean, not everybody has the platform, obviously, that he has, the fan base that he has to pull this off. But I think it's really interesting to see what he's doing. He's really sort of thrown an interesting element into what's happening. I feel like publishing is in a real state of flux, and that Sanderson's recent decisions regarding his, and I don't know a ton about all this because again, I'm not a
The
huge,
like Audible stuff and things.
Yeah, the Audible stuff, and I admire his stand there, but also the fact that he's he's got his own publishing company, essentially. So you could call it self-publishing if you want, I guess. It's a little different when you
It's
have.
more like he's an indie publisher and he's the only author on the label.
Yeah.
But what is interesting and most people don't know is even so before he had the Wheel of Time deal, so we're talking he's known for Mistborn and Elantris and he's doing good. He's maybe above mid-list, but he's not like a super big author. Warbreaker was completely self-published on his website. To this day, you can read it for free.
That's interesting. And
it's not the best format to read it. But he like serialized released it on his website.
Interesting. So he's always been kind of experimenting, I guess, a little bit with
And I think part of that is early on publishers really want you to commit to like a series and be like, we're buying this from you, put it out. And Sanderson's always been like, I need to be changing between projects. I need to be doing these things. That helps his writer's block. I mean, I can't even like writing my dissertation was a whole process. I don't even know how to get past writing one thing, much less how much he puts out. But
I don't know how anyone does that either. I know
you just wrote a trilogy, right?
Yes. Well, I've been working on that for a long time. And it's, 18 years in the making, but not constant. I have to teach during the semesters. So it's really mostly during the summers that I've been doing that. And I can't imagine writing 2 or 3 other books while working on, my trilogy. That's just, wow. How do you do that? I do 1 book at a time. I don't even like to read more than 1 book at a time, let alone write. And I know Steven Erikson was writing at one point at least 3, if not 4 books simultaneously. I think he stopped doing that. But
what?
Yeah, I mean, he was working on, the 3 that I know for sure. One is the second book in the Witness trilogy. So the sequel to The God Is Not Willing. He's also was working simultaneously on the 3rd book in the Carcanis trilogy, Walk in Shadow. And there was another, I think it was more science fiction-y book that he was working on at the same time. And I think he might have even been mentioning something else. Maybe it's his book on writing or something, but yeah, at one point he was working on, and I think he stopped doing that now. But I don't know how
you try to imagine, because like I've only read the first 6 Malazan books so far, but I'm just like, those are challenging, especially with the continuity he has to keep track of because he chooses most of the time a fragmented style, which is, you got a lot of things in the pan you got to keep track of.
Yeah. I don't think any of them are as vast or elaborate as the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I think he would agree with that. I think these are series that are more contained, where I think Erikson was just doing everything in Malazan Book of the Fallen. And so, yeah, that I don't know how he wrote that as fast as he did amazes me too, because he was writing one of those a year pretty much.
Because I guess if he really did understand the world like the back of his hand from like the RPG stuff,
right?
Because that's a lot of the work maybe, but he must have just really enjoyed it, right? Like if you don't hate writing it, it probably comes by quicker. But like, yeah, there's a lot of words. I truly have not read stuff as long, but I will say, because I'm good with long books. I'm a fantasy reader. But once we get past the 700, 800 page mark, I'm like, why are you this long? I need you to tell me why you're this long for me to believe you deserved my time. And most of the time with his books, it's like, okay, at least you gave me a complete arc within the story. I understood why you did all the things you did. And maybe a few things feel indulgent for my taste, but it wasn't too, it feels earned most of the time. And like even the one that I like the least, House of Chains, I know will be so much better on reread, because that's how it felt. It's like, oh, none of this is supposed to make sense to me yet, which is annoying right now. But
yeah. Well, I have to agree with that. I mean, you do get lots out of Malazan on the first read, no doubt about it. And if you only read it once, I think it's certainly worth it. That said, my second read was way cooler.
I was about to say, I can't wait to read Gardens of the Moon again after I finish reading this, because I'm so close. I'm about to finish Wheel of Time. Maybe by the time this video is on the internet, I have finished Wheel of Time and I can finally get back into Malazan.
Are you on the last book now?
Yeah, talk about books that I'm not sure need to be this long, but yes.
And of course, that's Sanderson, who's writing that.
What's interesting is like, yes, it's Sanderson, but he did a really good job of not changing things. Like the characters are still Robert Jordan's characters, which is for
Yes.
me interesting because I don't love Robert Jordan's characters as much as I like Sanderson's characters. And I
Uh-huh.
don't think he's changed his writing per se, but let's just say that certain flaws that people talk about in Sanderson, I notice in Wheel of Time because I'm not distracted by the things Sanderson brings to the table in his own works. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been about a decade since I finished Wheel of Time. I read the last book right when it came out, so my timing was really good in
Yeah.
discovering Wheel of Time and everything. And the last book came out, and I was ready for it, so that was nice. But I never noticed when I picked up. Let's see, he started at book 11, I guess. No,
No, that was
12.
Jordan's last one, 12, Gathering
Yeah,
Storm.
yeah. So 12 was Sanderson, and I never thought, oh, this is so different. I thought it was pretty seamless when he picked up the narrative. So I thought he did a great job filling in there and finishing up the series. And that's it was also a really cool thing for him because I think it did help launch him into a different level of fame, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, I just remember talking about formative years. I read Way of Kings. Way of Kings has an ending, right? There's a lot of reveals in the ending of Way of Kings. I read Way of Kings. There was no word of radiance. There was nothing. And then I find out, oh, he's finishing Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Great. And I had to wait like 4 years for
Was
the
it
next.
that long before the next book came out? I didn't realize that. Okay.
I think so, because I mean, also time's weird when you're in high school and college, right? Everything feels longer. But I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I read it my senior year of high school, and I didn't get Words of Radiance till the summer after my junior year of college.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have to wait because I think by the time I read Way of Kings, the second book was already either out or close to being out.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, and I really liked Words of Radiance. That one was fun. That one's, I think, still my favorite. Maybe not my favorite on reread, but like in terms of like nostalgia of first reading experience, what a fun time.
yeah, I loved the first two. I really did. Way of Kings and Words of Radiance I thought were really great reads. And then the third book kind of stalled on me a bit. Maybe that's one reason why I haven't yet picked up Rhythm of War. I will read it. I'm totally
Might as
on
well
board.
wait at this point for the fifth one. So
That's what I'm doing. Yeah, because that period when everybody in the universe was reading Rhythm of War and gushing about it and everything it was all this excitement and everything. Somehow I was so busy during that period and it was so big and I was like, I kept putting it off. And by the time I was like, I'm just going to wait for shortly before book 5. So it'll be fresh for me.
Yeah. And I think that'll be important. I mean, I'm just going to reread them because I just enjoy rereading them. That's just, I love rereading, reconsuming media. That's like a big thing for me. Like, that's the thing that I have to force into my booktube schedule more for myself is like, because I love going back to a story that I know is a win, that I know I love. And like, it doesn't ever feel derivative to me to re-explore a story. And so I love rereading them. Like, I read Way of Kings like 4 times. And Rhythm of War, I do think there are lots of little things you'll want to have at least accessible in your brain if you choose to want to connect dots. But it's kind of like Malazan, where like if it's something important, it'll hit you in the face. Like you're gonna miss a lot of the little things maybe, but yeah. No, I'm excited to see where it goes because I don't know what he's gonna do. I have no idea what's happening in this fifth book. I'm like, I can't even, people like to theorize. I'm like, I don't know. I have no clue.
I feel like Sanderson's the whole Cosmere thing is conducive to a lot of fan theories and stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the fun, isn't it? What was the first Sanderson you read?
Elantris. It was the only one out.
Okay, yeah, okay. And then
so my stepdad at the time was courting my mom, like trying to get her to realize they should date because they were like best friends for like 20 years. And she's like, I don't want to ruin the friendship, like that whole Harry met Sally sort of situation. And he was picking us up from the airport, getting all the good points. And Elantris was in the backseat of his car. And I read the prologue. I'm like, can I have this? And of course, he was going to say yes. So I took his copy of Elantris that I immediately lost at some point because my mom then took it. And then my grandma, we all read it. Because that one's the most un-Sanderson-like Cosmere book, at least when people talk about Sanderson. A lot of what they talk about is not in Elantris. It does have a magic system, but a lot of the story is people don't know why the magic system's not working how it used to, and no one has the knowledge of how to make it work again.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
honestly more a story of these three individuals, each of them being put into a fish out of water situation, which is one of my favorite kind of like dynamics to watch a character. You
Yeah.
have a priest that comes from another land that's told if he doesn't get everyone to convert to their religion, this other land will invade and take over and conquer them. So he's trying to save these people by converting them to their religion. We have a princess who's coming over for a political alliance to find her husband is dead, but because of rules is married to him, so she can't leave, and she was always ostracized in her hometown, so she's trying to find a new place in this political court. And then we have Rowan, who was the husband that they think is dead because he was cursed and put into the city of Elantris. So he's our eyes in Elantris. And
Okay.
Sanderson always says that he is the character he wrote because he wanted to try and write a hopeful, not depressed character.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah, because he has you can tell when you read Sanderson characters, like, oh, here are the bones of what Shallan became or what X became, and like Rowan is like, oh, if Kaladin wasn't depressed out of his mind, like,
Huh. It's interesting because, I've like probably everyone else around here, I've watched interviews with Sanderson. He seems like a cheerful, really nice guy, and yet he has explored depression a lot in his books, which I think is fantastic. I think that's really great. So yeah.
no, I mean, I think he's very intentionally what he's done, and he's very open about when he does things that he doesn't look back on fondly. Like Elantris in particular was when he first attempted to incorporate an autistic character, and he doesn't like how that worked out. He's more Steris and Rhaenyra are his two more modern versions, which are way more fleshed out and full characters and less of the magical caricatures we tend to do with autism in stories.
Yeah, and like, I'm familiar with the one in the Stormlight Archive, Renarin or Renarin. Is that how you say it? Yeah.
Their fantasy names. I don't know.
Whatever you want goes. Okay, good.
Even Sanderson at like interviews is always like, I don't know how to say these names. Do what you want.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, okay, that helps.
Yeah, it's like I try my best, but like I have no clue. And then obviously like audiobook, like the narrators for audiobooks, they like ignore in-page stuff anyways. Like I know Michael Kramer makes one of the characters like Irish, where he's obviously not inspired by Irish culture at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like it's like he's okay, this is actually more of a Central American character, but sure. Like maybe I don't want you, Kramer, to be using whatever Mexican accent you might have. That's probably for the best, but
yeah. Wow. Huh. So what else? I mean, we keep digressing away from your reading journey, but these have been wonderful. Yeah. So Sanderson obviously has been huge in your life, in your reading life. And are there any other authors that you would consider to be important to explain who you are?
I mean, he was a big one for a while. Let's see. I mean, I think there aren't as many that, like, if I look at my shelves to the side of me, I don't get to Jemison for a long time, but she's big for me. Also, sorry if you hear my cat. He just, he sometimes wanders around and yells at me.
Oh, that's great. We love critters here on Dear Dr. Fantasy. So
he's just a loud one. Are you gonna be quiet? So Jemison I didn't get to until, oh my gosh, fine, I'll pick you up. Oh goodness. Ugh.
Oh, there we are.
This is my cat. He is a monster. He's 15 years old and very fluffy. Yeah, so Jemison I got to, it was before YouTube.
Okay, I was just going to ask. Yeah, was it before your channel? Yeah.
I mean, I read the rest of her when I had a channel, but Broken Earth was 2019, and I didn't start watching BookTube till the summer of 2019. I was a foolish person. I only watched board game YouTube, which is even smaller than BookTube, if you can imagine that.
Board game YouTube. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, every niche you can think about is there on YouTube, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it was tennis. I watched tennis highlights and that was it. And once in a while, if I had a project I had to do around the house, I had to figure out, caulking or something, how to do it correctly, I would watch a YouTube video, but that was it. I didn't even know about BookTube either. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jemison was one where I got excited because I think a big turning point in my reading was, I've gone to bookstores, my whole life, like any book lover, and you just are like, these are the books you're supposed to read because they're the ones on the shelf. They must be good, right? Like, why else are they on the shelf? So I've dabbled in almost every very big popular author, except for some of the backlist ones. Like Tad Williams is a huge hole in my catalog. Yeah. But like most every other author I have read, if not tried, most of the time before BookTube. So like I read Brent Weeks before BookTube and stuff like that, who was like a huge author. I mean, back when Lightbringer was being finished up, and I'm sure he'll have a little resurgence again now that they're reprinting Night Angel and stuff.
Okay. Do you feel like on Brent Weeks, if we can again digress, I've only read the first book in Lightbringer, which is the Black
Black Prism.
Black Prism. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, this guy must have read Sanderson, and because I feel like he's doing something very similar, where it was a lot of really interesting exploration of a magical system that seemed to be unfolding before me, the reader, but also the character. And I thought similar level of sort of, he was pitching it. It felt more slightly YA to me, and I didn't read the rest of the series, so I might be way off on that. But that's kind of like, I felt like, okay, this is sort of like a Sanderson fan who's also become a successful fantasy writer. Is that a fair characterization or not, do you think?
I mean, in general, I read it because people who liked Sanderson told me to read it, but also people who like Sanderson told me to read Lies of Locke Lamora, and I don't think that's a good, if you like this, you'll like that comp.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I love Lies of Locke Lamora myself, but
they're very different.
I don't think of that as anything like Sanderson's, right?
I think people were just being like, these are popular fantasy authors I like, because back when I was at the bookstore, the big 3 to 4 was Patrick Rothfuss, Sanderson, Scott Lynch. Those were the ones that all of the guys in my who liked fantasy were reading. I actually, before Joe Abercrombie was big, I read him back when there were only 3 books.
Yes, see, I would say that Lynch is more like Abercrombie and Mark Lawrence. Those guys I would put in maybe a one, like, if you like this, read that kind of category, but definitely not Brent Weeks. I think of him more in the Sanderson camp, but
yeah, no. So Brent Weeks, I agree. It plays with hard magic. It's generally a not intense writing style. It's a page turner. I have read, I think, everything Brent Weeks has written, including the Night Angel trilogy, which I do think the Night Angel trilogy, it's a little, I think, too graphic to technically be put in young adult, right? Like if we're talking about graphic content for children sort of thing. But in terms of like, it's an orphan, like assassin teenage boy. Like it's very tropey in a very like, this would be probably an anime for teens. Like it felt like a lot of that sort of stuff. I didn't like Night Angel that much because it did read kind of, I mean, read like a debut in like the messiest way to me. I thought Lightbringer was a little more fleshed out, but I read it more like I read like Red Rising. It was like brain candy. It wasn't very like I was hyper analyzing it. I was like, cool, where are we going? This book's too long. Like the 3rd book is way too long.
Oh, is it? Okay. But I think that's the right spirit to approach that kind of book. At least that I've only read the Black Prism.
I mean, it's a book series that's about the twists and the turns, and like there are really fun character arc growths, you know, like, and there's a lot of, you know, here comes the cavalry fist pump moments. Like that's the type of series it is. But if it's one of those where you choose to critically analyze it for other value, I mean, there's going to be something there. It's not devoid of value, but it's not, I think its purpose. I think its core purpose is to be an escapist time.
Yeah. No, I think that every book probably has a theme, but not every author is thinking about theme first when they write a book, obviously. And so there you can have different levels of exploration of theme, you know, and that's fine. That's great. It's good that we have books that are pitched for, you know, different, more on the side of maybe entertainment versus more exploration of important themes. Like, for example, on this side, you may have N.K. Jemisin looking at oppression and resilience to oppression. And maybe on another side, you have just a Dresden Files book where it's more about the action and the fun. And although I think later Dresden Files gets more and more toward this side, but the earlier books are definitely much more just, you know, what people call popcorn reads, that sort of thing, I think.
I always call them, I mean, popcorn's fine, blockbuster. I say usually airplane because that's when I read them, is when I'm on vacation or I'm on an airplane. Yeah. Like I need a book that'll get me through this ride and it doesn't require me to like have focus, because I don't always have focus while traveling, right? Like you're always like, I don't want to miss the train. Like you need something that's easy to get in and out of without too much like needing to sit into it, I guess.
They're also great for a change of pace. So I read initially some of the Dresden books when I was reading Malazan. So if, you know, as a palate cleanser type thing, you know, which is great, you know, I think it's great that we have these different kinds of, within our genre, a wide range when it comes to this sort of spectrum between entertainment and thematic exploration and that sort of thing. So
no, yeah. Other things I read, Joe Abercrombie I read in college because my friends and I, because I read when I was in college was when the Game of Thrones TV show came out, so I read the books before the show. I think we started watching the show when season 1 was out, but I read those, and then Hunger Games, that came out. I had to read Hunger Games because everyone was reading Hunger Games, so
Okay.
read that. I don't think any of those are formative to me other than Game of Thrones. If it ever gets finished, I will actually reread it because I think, especially having just watched House of the Dragon, I think I wasn't in a place where I wanted to engage thematically with what George was putting down. And
Uh-huh.
so I wasn't really connecting to the characters in a way that I was like, they're fine. They're really good characters. I do Crows and Dance of Dragons really lost the momentum for me and wasn't focusing on what I care about because
Yeah.
I do pick up fantasy for magic, and there is magic in A Song of Ice and Fire.
But it's
But
not the
like,
focus. Yeah.
you have the coolest prologue of all time in a Game of Thrones, and then we just like don't talk about it for books. And I'm just
Yeah. It is a great prologue. I agree. Yeah.
like, it's like, and then we have really cool wolves that like bond with these children, and we really only kind of unpack. Like, there's just so many teasing of tropes that now I understand he's subverting and he's focusing on other things. So if it's ever a finished thought, I will approach it again. But I read all 5 of those.
Cool. Yeah, me too. What about, so you mentioned First Law a couple times. Have you followed up from the original trilogy and read the rest of the standalones, the short story collection, the Age of Madness trilogy, all that?
I keep wanting, so that was one of the things. So when I came on booktube and everyone's talking about Joe Abercrombie, everyone loves him, and I read him a couple, probably 2015, and I came on booktube in 2020, and I'm like, I liked them, but they were just fine. Like, I didn't, they weren't groundbreaking for me. I understood what they were doing. Like, I literally bought them because my Dungeons and Dragons group wanted to read a fantasy book. I'm like, this looks like it's a subversion of the Dungeons and Dragons trope, which is exactly what it is. And
Yep.
like,
Yep.
and so we read it and they all liked it. But there's the character West is like one of my least favorite characters in all of
Colin
fiction.
West. Yeah.
And everyone in my friend group loved him. And I'm like, no, and I think Abercrombie means him to be the worst because he is the real life bad guy. Don't like him. Whereas
It's
everyone else.
interesting. Yeah, I think West is so Abercrombie captures, I think, an important truth, and not just with West, with Colin West, but with a lot of people in general, and a lot of his characters, which is that we spend a lot of our time, and this is without any spoilers, but we spend a lot of our time pretending to be nice, pretending to be civilized, and using that veneer of civilization to excuse a lot of things that we do, that when you really look underneath, there's some cruelty there. There's something more, there's more primal, deeper thing going on that we excuse, we pretend that it's civilized and therefore it's okay. And I think that sometimes that primal part of us just roars and says, no, you're still very much a beast. And I think that that's what the truth, that dichotomy, because Abercrombie was a psychology major, I believe, when he was studying at university. And he captures that really brilliantly, that tension between our prefrontal cortex, right, and our amygdala, the no, I am civilized and I can control these impulses, versus the, fight or flight, that kind of thing. So I think Colin West really captures that pretty well. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why he terrifies me the most, because everyone else, when they break, like Logan Nine Fingers and his obvious Jackal Hyde persona-ish thing,
Right.
That's more like safe in a supernatural box that I don't think about with reality, even though it's obviously a direct metaphor to the human condition, like you were talking about. Whereas the way West is portrayed, like, no, that's a person, someone who has a Colin West in their life. Like, that's a real live person that's timeless, that is outside of fantasy. Like,
something dangerous lurking beneath what might appear to be a nice facade. Yeah.
And like, I mean, that's also what I love about Robin Hobb. I just think I reread it because everyone talks about it. And I actually, so first read, I liked the 3rd book best because the 3rd book really does show you the purpose of the trilogy in a very satisfying way.
Yeah.
But on reread, the 1st book, I think I realized the satire and how funny it is. Like, the 1st book was really funny on reread. And I tried to read Best Served Cold, and I was trying to do the audiobook, and I think I just have to do the physical because I know everyone loves the audiobook narrator, and I did like him for the trilogy, but his voice for this female character is just not working for me. It's just not. I'm trying. Also, I'm really a hard sell on a pure revenge motivated plot,
Okay.
just because it's not engaging or mysterious to me in a way. So I don't know why I'm turning the pages. I'm just like, yeah, we're trying to do this thing, and now we're doing the stuff to do this. It it's not typically very interesting to me. There are exceptions to every rule and stuff like that, but I might, if I try it again and I can't get through Best Served Cold, skip to the new trilogy. Because as much as people say you need to know about all this stuff, because I think Shiver and things like that, but I'm just like, if anyone ever even wants me to try this trilogy, I'm gonna maybe one day have to just skip to it.
Yeah. Well, huh. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you can get through Best Served Cold, which I love, by the way, the other standalones are different.
Yeah, one's like a Wild West sort of thing, right?
Red Country is, and then the Heroes is more or less like a battle.
Yeah.
Which is really, in my mind, just brilliantly explored. So, and then there's the short stories, which for me are largely not as good as his novels, but there are a couple in there that really do stand out as pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm not expecting them to be very good. I mean, I read a lot of short stories. That's the thing. When I started BookTube, I got way back into short stories because Edgar Allan Poe, that was a big author for me back in high school.
Oh, okay.
I forgot about him.
Yeah.
He was the one classic author we read where I went out of my way to
Yep.
read more of his stuff because
Yeah.
he got me. I was like, yeah, this is the gothic horror I like. This is it right here.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so most authors, even Jemison, who I do love, who write long form really well, they struggle to write short form in a way that I think is the appropriate way of writing a short story. Because a short story is not just a longer story made short. That's not what a short story is.
No. It's a different art form. It's like it's different from a novel as a poem is in many ways. And it's hard to pull off. And Abercrombie, for me, is a great novelist. Short stories, yeah, I think he would have to work more on to write great short stories. But I will say that Age of Madness, in my mind, is his very best. And
that's why I want to get to it, because it's not like I've had any red flags with him as an author. It's not that I'm not engaged or I have anything where I'm like atrociously bored and I find no interest in the ideas he's going for. It's just, I think what I'm going to do, because this is how I like plan my life for books that I think are maybe not necessarily for me, my brain candy, but I want to read because I like being in the know of a lot of authors. Like that's why I've read so many backlist of like popular things. They're not necessarily my taste, but like A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings are big examples of things that are not my bread and butter, but are so foundational and beloved that it's like, well, I want to know. You don't need to be a fantasy fan, right? But I want to.
Right.
So I think after Malazan, which I do actually really enjoy, Malazan is like what I've been searching for in terms of like, I just want high epic fantasy that like isn't afraid to just be epic for the sake of it.
Like, yeah, Malazan is definitely there. Yeah.
like that's what because again, I read fantasy for magic, and like sometimes the most popular fantasy things are very devoid of magic.
Yes. Yeah, like A Song of Ice and Fire is.
And in Lord of the Rings, I mean, both of them are about magic not being a part of the world. They're in a transitionary time. Like that's the focus, which is thematically interesting. But if you want magic, is not as cool.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, whereas when it comes to magic, Malazan just goes for it. I mean, that's big magic. It's definitely soft magic, but it's big. Yeah.
It's soft magic with enough rules that like not everything can happen, but with enough holes that you're like, oh, well, that Here Comes the Cavalry moment is totally fine. I'm totally bought in. That's great. So I think after that, because that's so battle heavy, and so is Abercrombie. He's very, in the trenches heavy. Yep. After I finish that, I'll go back to Abercrombie and Tad Williams. And I also, by then, hopefully will have finished Realm of the Elderling, because I think I'm almost actually at the same point you are in Realm of the Elderling. I'm maybe a little ahead by a book, but we're at about the same point.
Have you finished Tawny Man?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're ahead of me. I'm
a little ahead of you, but I haven't started Rainwild yet.
Okay, so you're one book ahead of me then.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we can talk some Hob then. Yeah. So where does Hob fit in? Where does Realm of the Elderlings fit in for you right now? Because I think it's my third favorite fantasy series of all time at this point. And the way Tawny Man is going, I'm starting to wonder, could it, I don't know, this is going to be tough, but I just think it's brilliant so far. I really fell in love with it. I think I liked Farseer. I really did. I don't have huge issues with it, but it was Live Ship Traders that convinced me, okay, this is something very special here. And now Tawny Man is just blowing me away. So where are you thinking about it?
I mean, Live Ship Traders as a trilogy is in one of my top 5 trilogies of all time. I talk about a trilogy that like every book is like easily 5-star status. Like I know you don't rate books, and like I don't really.
Yeah.
I in my head it's just like there's nothing I would really change. And in the past, I used to think there was a thing in Ship of Destiny I would change, but now I've read Tawny Man, and so now I'm like, no, it's entirely 5. Everything's perfect.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. But I do think I struggle more with the Fitz books, but it's not because the books are bad. It's more that Fitz as a character. I mean, I like you, Farseer was really good. It was a really solid time. I think I hurt myself a little bit by reading Assassin's Quest and The Great Hunt in Wheel of Time at the same time.
Wow.
They're both very long books that
spend
a lot of time traveling, which again, we talked is not my thing. So it was, but I think Assassin's Quest, I really appreciated it because it's like, well, you wanted me to feel exhausted because that's what the characters are feeling. That's the intent. And I can, that's bonus points. But especially in Tawny Man, I felt it was a journey for me. So like the first 2 books I liked, but Fitz was really hard for me. And I think I did the thing, like whenever you meet a character, you bring your own burden and life experience to a character. And Fitz became my father, especially because a lot of the Tawny Man is about that next generation and cycles of generational trauma, right? Like that's a huge theme in almost every series, but Tawny Man specifically goes into it a lot. And I'm like, every decision Fitz made, I was so frustrated. I was just like, and I was putting a lot of the anger that I have towards my own father onto Fitz because I can't do that to my own dad because I want a functional relationship with my father.
Right, right. Yeah.
But I don't need a functional relationship.
So Fitz became your punching bag too then.
Yeah, and I was honestly so shocked, and I won't mention anything specific, but when I got to the 3rd book, I was so shocked at how I felt by the end of it. And I was like, oh, now I understand why people can reread it. And it's not like a big plot moment or anything. There was just like a moment where I think at that point I realized, oh, Hob is on my side. Because I was questioning it for a while. I was like, I'm just like, this character that I am following is so difficult to follow. And then there's a lot of great moments and character interactions that just like, I don't know, I felt really cathartic at the end. And I was just like, so like that was a really weird because like I do think I was having a less good time with the first 2 just because I think I don't think anyone agrees with what Fitz does in those books. I think everyone's like, Fitz boy, we love you. Why are you doing these things? These are not nice things, especially in The Golden Fool. There's like that whole thing that is so hard to read.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
But I think
but I think
go ahead.
As you say, you don't hate him for it, right? It's just that you can see his limitations based on his own past, his own history, his culture. I mean, there are so many things that contribute to his inability to see what he's doing in that moment. But one thing you have to say about him is that he is capable of thinking about it and going back and trying to rectify, but to, at least to address what he's done. Yeah. So that takes courage.
Yeah, he's a redeemable, flawed character in many ways. And like, it was just really hard because like I was not giving him grace, mainly because like I said, I was putting a lot of my own personal baggage because there were so many things he did that I had done to me. And I was just like, this is not okay. I was just very extra annoyed. Like my least favorite character maybe of all time is Kyle Haven from Live Ship Traders. But there was a moment where I was like, Fitz. There was a moment we got past it. We're okay. But if he was my friend, I would have been saying things way earlier. No, but so but that shows the strength of Hob, right? Like you cannot help but feel so much about what you're seeing happening. Like
so true. And for me too, I don't know if this happened with you, but so far reading Tawny Man has made me actually appreciate Farseer more, and it makes me want to go back and reread it.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I reread. I mean, obviously, we need to get to the end before the reread. But no, and I mean, I'm excited for Rainwild, if only because, like, so my mom, I gave Live Ship to read because I don't think she could handle the sadness that is Fitz. She doesn't like things to get as sad as Fitz moments can get. Not
Okay.
saying live ships is a happy time, but I know her limits.
I know, like Wintro and Fitz could probably have a helpful, group therapy session,
Yeah, no, there's a lot in live ships too. But I gave her that, and then I was like, well, you could read the rest of the Realm of the Elderlings. Like, no, I'm just going to skip to Rain Wild. And she did and had a fun time. And we have similar tastes. Like, I like things that she won't like, but almost everything she likes, I like, so.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so we have friends around here on booktube that would probably have heart attacks at the notion of skipping any of the trilogies. There's Jake, don't skip live ship. Bishop.
Well, I agree. So many people skip live ship, and that does that series such a disservice.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's Scott, the Bald Booktuber, who is all about publication order.
I mean, most of the time I'm with Scott. That's the way to go.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's an incredible journey, Realm of the Elderlings. However you do it, I don't think there's a wrong way. There's Chris from Chris Bookish Cauldron, who I think he read live ship first. I think that's what he told me. Because we talked about live ship as I was reading it. He and I and Ridima and Andy Smith have a video talking about live ship traders. And I believe that's where Chris started. And then he went back to Farseer. I think that's how he did it. So there's no wrong way to come to love the Realm of the Elderlings, right? So
I don't think so. I mean, I do think it depends on who you are as a reader and knowing yourself. Because I do think if you are someone who likes interconnectivity and noticing it, then yes, you want to err on the side of publication order. If that's not what brings you joy in reading, then it does not matter if you leave live ship before Farseer or vice versa. Like, it doesn't. I mean, Tawny Man might not make a lot of sense if you skip live ship. That's my opinion. But
you'll miss a lot. You'll miss a lot of things. And that, for me, there were some moments of, oh, I love this. This is where these things start to come together. And yeah, I mean, you would miss that if you skipped any of the trilogies, I guess. But yeah. So you said 6 books into Malazan now? Is that where you are?
Yeah, I read Bone Hunters last summer. That's the 6th one, right? That's after Midnight Tides.
That's Bone Hunters. Yep.
And that's the one that has... I do think that battle scene is longer than the battle scene in Wheel of Time, but it has one of the longer siege battle scenes, right? That chapter that's like
you're talking about Igatan.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Like, the way he focuses on perspectives. Like, not everything he does works perfectly for my taste, but I really appreciate it. And like, I love the Marines like a lot.
Yeah.
Like, and I think Bottle's now one of my favorites.
Oh, I love Bottle. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. It's just, there's so many people to like, and you're given so little to like form those bonds, but like they're pretty instantaneous when they happen. Like, I instantly loved Mapple and Icurium. Like, I was like, I'm in, I'm down. Yeah. I'm sad all the time, but I'm in.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Erickson will do that to you for sure. But I just think there's so much, and you mentioned the Marines, of course, originally it's the Bridge Burners, later the Bone Hunters. I feel like they are us in this epic world. That's why it's so easy. They're like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, they're our stand-in there, and they are surrounded by this epicness and these characters who are like 300,000 years old and ascendants and, epic magic on just vast scales and all this stuff. And then there's just humans, and these people are just sort of figuring out how to survive amidst all of this. And I love that we have those characters to identify with there.
And I just love the few that we get seen forced into higher roles that they don't want. Like, Gruntle's great. I mean, his ability to name characters really dumb things that bring me joy is pretty fantastic. Like,
yeah. That's something I think he gets in part from Glenn Cook.
Okay, yeah, I have actually read Black Company.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've dabbled in almost every big author. Just I don't always finish them, because Black Company, and maybe after I finish Malazan, I'll have the narrative tools to go back. But I can handle a lot of being thrown into it and fragmentation. But Black Company was very much, I have no idea where I am, and I don't know what I should be focusing on, and I don't know what we're doing. And that's in its intent, right? Because that's its goal. But it was really hard for me on my first read. So.
Yeah, I've only read the first 3 Black Company books myself, and I that was a long time ago, and I was probably in a similar space to what you're talking about. So I'd like to go back to them too and reread them and see what more I can get from them.
Especially since Black Company is like the progenitor of Grimdark, right? Like it's kind
Um,
of it's one of them. Like if someone listed a top 5 of the origins of it.
I think you could make an argument there. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to take it, I mean, that would be an unusual like American contribution because I feel like sometimes a lot of the Grimdark is British too. So I just read um, David Gemmel's Legend, which along with my friend AP Canavan, and AP has always argued that Gemmel is an important predecessor for Grimdark as well. So but yeah, you could probably point to lots of different things. Go back as far as, you know, Conan or something, maybe the sword and sorcery stuff. But
sword and sorcery, man, we don't give it enough credit. I mean, I don't love it that much, but like, man, that's how fantasy kept going after Lord of the Rings for a long time before it found its new-ish skin.
oh, I think so. I think a lot of fantasy has been more than we maybe acknowledge, a kind of dialogue or play between what we think of as more like the Tolkien high fantasy, epic fantasy side of it, and then the more sword and sorcery, gritty side of it. And then just honestly, a lot of things are really more a combination of these things.
Yeah.
So
well, and I realized one day that I didn't know that this was the thing that attracted me, but like the very niche sort of trope subgenre of dying earth fantasy is something I really like.
Yeah.
Which is like Mistborn and Broken Earth. Like there's a lot that I really like. And and like I think I've only read Terry Brooks. I've only read one of his trilogies within the Shannara verse, and it was like the prequel one that's like something with the demon. It's like our day before the apocalypse that triggers the medieval fantasy series that is his first trilogy.
Okay.
I haven't read a lot because I was like, I don't need elves and dwarves because I don't know. I get bored with elves and dwarves. I'm a bad person in fantasy genre.
I only read Sword of Shannara myself, and that was when I was a lot younger and a big Tolkien fan. And I read it and I thought, this is like fan fiction of Lord of the Rings. So, yeah. But what I've heard is that actually Brooks goes in his own direction in the later books. So I should go back to Terry Brooks someday.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the trilogy I read because it was like kind of it was a dark sort of trilogy of like, it was also the dynamic of this dude having to find this younger person and be a grumpy mentor to this younger person and like protect them because the prophecy would be fulfilled if something bad. And I kind of like those kind of closer claustrophobic things.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you like the Dying Earth thing, then again, Book of the Ancestor is by Mark Lawrence. I think you might want to try that one. What I'm reading right now is actually very much a kind of, I think, if I can figure out what this is, I just finished the the first book in Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe.
That's like the original of this weird, like, so future it's fantasy sort of trope.
Yeah. I mean, Shadow of the Torturer, it was just sort of like, most of the time I was like, what am I reading?
I'm not quite there yet to read it. One day I want to, but I'm like, oh, I don't have the brain cells at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it wasn't hard to read necessarily. Like the prose is accessible. It's good. It's good prose. And not hard in and of itself, except that especially in the beginning, it felt like there were all these words I didn't know what they were. There were the names of like different social classes, and there are different creatures and just objects with these weird names, and he's just dropping them left and right. And I'm like, what? I don't know what this is. Is this important? And sometimes I feel like it's just a thing that makes me feel like I'm in some other place, but it's never explained. I'm like, what is this, man? You know, and it's almost alienating, and maybe deliberately so. I would expect a writer of his caliber to know that it has to be alienating to drop all these weird words in here. So, but yeah, I mean, just kind of along for the ride at the moment.
And like, I think I'm getting better at being prepared for that because I read it's the Machineries of Empire trilogy by Yoon Ha Lee. It's a sci-fi trilogy, and that one's jarring in a different way because it also does the thing of just dropping you in very Gardens of the Moon style of like, oh, I'm just watching a battle right now. I don't know who the players are, why we're fighting, what we're using to fight. I don't know anything. But then the vocabulary of this world uses words that we do know, but not in the context in which we use them. Like calendars is a word that is used. I'm like, what does that mean? What is the heretical calendar? And it does make sense later as you go, but it is very alienating and jarring, just like, you're using words I know and words I don't know, and I don't have context clues.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're with me. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I'm reading it finally, Book of New Sun, because so many people have recommended it and said this is really one of the most brilliant things ever in speculative fiction.
Do you have the companion thing that everyone always reads alongside it?
Not yet, but I'm thinking I better get it. I'm going to be talking about it with a couple people who have read it before and know more about it than I do. So I feel like I'm going to get a lot of help from that. But yeah, there's a couple of essays on it that I'm going to read. I actually like reading speculative fiction where I have to read essays to understand what I'm reading. So, but that's what this is, I think. Just going in, it's good to know you might need a little research to get the full Book of the New Sun experience,
Yeah. And like that's what's nice about like our genre. It's like, is that indulgent? For sure. But for some people, that's going to be like the perfect, like intellectual fun experience, and like that's not going to be for everyone. And that's okay. That's more than okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say if you're looking for at the moment an entertaining read, just light, fun, airplane read, as you were saying, not Book of the Sun. I don't think so. But if you're looking for something you want to sink your teeth into and think about and try to unravel, then yeah, it's fun. So but we'll see what I make of it all.
Yeah, you'll let us know if it's worth it.
I'll try. I mean, I know a lot of people love this tetralogy. So I'm gonna try to see what it's all about. Anyway,
is tetralogy what we call 4-book series?
Yeah. I mean, that's
really nice. I've never known what I call them, but I like it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one word at least for a 4-book series. Yeah. So.
No, I mean, I like that. Yeah.
Tetralogy. Yeah. Learn something every day on Dear Dr. Fantasy. So
well, what's fascinating is in biophysics, when you have 4 things put together, it is a tetramer. So like it makes sense in my head. Yeah. I get the tetra. Like I'm like, oh yeah, that is 4.
Yep. Okay. And then you have the game Tetris, right? Yeah. So there must be something about 4 in that, I would guess.
I think it's from Plato's time when we had those words and stuff. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, I think it's Greek. Yeah. And in poetry, there's tetrameter, right? Yep. So yeah. Well, cool. So what are you looking forward to reading? What's on the horizon? Where do you think you're going to be? What are you going to be talking about on your channel in the near future?
In the near future. Well, I mean, I'm excited to finish Wheel of Time. That's a thing that I'm like really excited to like see the whole picture, because like that's the thing, I like seeing an entire picture. It's why it's actually really hard for me to DNF books. It's like, but I can't know for sure until I've seen the whole picture. Like I don't know.
So where are you now in the 14th book?
50% of the way.
Okay.
So like, I mean, it's a long book though, so I still have like another book's amount left of it.
I will say that though I read it a decade ago, the latter half, the last part of that book is some of the most memorable stuff from the entire series.
Yeah, I think I'm having a good time with it, honestly. I've had bad times in other books in the series. I'm more just like a little annoyed that so many new things are still being introduced in this book, because I'm just like, we've had so much time to introduce everything you need.
Right. Well, originally Sanderson was supposed to finish it in 1 book, right?
I think it could have been 2 books. I do think there's some stuff that could have been condensed, or if it was as important to Jordan as Jordan thought, should have been put in, say, Crossroads of Twilight. Like that's a whole book that I don't know what its purpose was in the series, but it could have had other things in it.
Yeah.
I don't like Crossroads of Twilight a lot. I don't think that's a hot take though in the Wheel of Time fandom.
I don't think it's extremely hot take. No,
it's a pretty long book that does very little. I'm excited about this because a lot of people in our circle of booktube in particular have really liked this book, and I'm hoping I'm one of them. And it's Empire of Silence. I'm starting that next week.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if you've read that, but like we know a lot of people who have read it.
So. I have not yet. Yeah.
But I'm hoping, and like I've read the first chapter because I was trying to see if I was in the mood for it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, this is too close to Red Rising, which I was rereading, and I'm like, oh, that would be bad to both books. But it feels like I feel the Dune inspiration, which isn't a negative thing, so I'm excited to like go in with that kind of influence expectation. So we'll see. But
cool.
Those are the big ones, but I'm not starting that till I finish Wheel of Time, because I can read multiple books at once, but I don't like to read too many large books at the same time, because I like having short books on the side to make me feel like I'm finishing things.
Yeah, no, that's smart. That's a good strategy. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I noticed that you were in a discussion recently on a book by is it Simon?
Yeah, Simon
Jimenez?
Jimenez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I recently spoke with Evie, as you know, and she recommended not the one that you talked about, the one with
Do
the
you like Spear Cuts Through Water more than The Vanished Birds? Yeah.
yes, that's the one, and I now have that book thanks to Evie. I'm excited to try that out.
No, it's really good. I like Vanished Birds more than Spear Cuts Through Water, but I mean, I do think with your, grounding in fantasy, that is probably the right one for you to try first.
Okay. Yeah.
I
And they're
think, I
not
mean,
they're
they're
not
both very,
related books. They're not part of it. Okay. Yeah.
he's the rare author who writes a standalone book.
Okay. Yes. I mean, standalones are actually welcome. And I think for a lot of us, because as you know, you're finishing Wheel of Time, it can be very hard to cover on a booktube channel a 14 book or 16 book or 10
Yeah.
book series because you review book one, you get X number of views on it. When you review book 10, that number is a lot smaller, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think with Wheel of Time, I talk about it a lot in like my wrap-ups and things like that, because I just do kind of like standard booktube things because it still brings me joy, right? Everyone just makes the content that brings them joy, I hope, because that's the algorithm isn't your friend no matter what you do, but that doesn't matter. But I think Wheel of Time, after the first 6 books, because everyone's always like, that's the best part, is the first 6 books. I made a video on that. And then I was going to maybe do one on the slog, but I'm like, I don't have anything useful to say about the slog, so I'm just going to wait till I finish it.
The slog is sloggy, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it was better for me than others because the books were short, and you don't spend as long in them. But
I never thought anything about the slog when I read Wheel of Time because I wasn't connected with any communities. I just read it and I didn't notice a slog. I just, I felt like each book probably could have been shorter in the series as a whole, but
yeah,
I never felt there was a middle slog thing going on. But
yeah. I mean,
whatever.
I think I would agree, like, because I think some people say book 7's the start, but I think you need book 7 to finish the arc after book 6. So, like, I feel like book 7's actually a very satisfying book in the series because it actually wraps up some threads. One of my biggest critiques of Wheel of Time is we keep the metaphor of this tapestry going, and
Yeah.
it's very obvious to me in his plotting that Robert Jordan has never worked with color thread in his life, because if you have a thread that you do not pick up for many rounds, you lose tension. That's just what happens when you do color work. And
Oh,
that's also
interesting.
what happens in your story if you have a thread from 7 books ago. So I just that annoys me a lot because it's like this metaphor is in my face and I know how to craft and make color work, and we're
Yeah.
doing this wrong.
Well, and it works too as a writing metaphor. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So but I think book 10, no, not book 10, book 9 I liked because I was like, oh, we did a thing I never thought we would do. That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
And also this is how low my bar is for some Wheel of Time characters. Rand al'Thor asks for help and I'm like, whoa, big moment, boy.
You've done some growing there. Good job. Yeah.
Like, that's where my bar was at for Rand at the time. But then
Okay.
I think for me, Crossroads of Twilight was my lowest point. But then Knife of Dreams was really fun.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, like, for me, I think it was more like, but I also didn't like the first 6 as much as everyone else. So I think I've had a very stagnant experience. And I
Okay.
should have probably stopped, but my friend Stephanie made me keep going. You know Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, I assume.
Yes, I do know who she is. Yeah.
I mean, now she's blaming me that she's keeping going because she would have stopped in the slog. And I'm like, I was doing this because of you.
That's so funny. This is what happens with buddy reads, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but we've made it this far because now I'm truly at the point where I'm like, I know some people would maybe DNF this far in, but it's like, no, I need to see the end.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
no,
it's
so
funny.
but Spear Cuts Through Water is such a fantastic homage to epic storytelling while being completely unique. Like,
Huh.
that's what I like about Simon Jimenez. It's like he's not ignoring the ground that has been laid out before him.
Yeah.
Like, I felt never-ending story vibes. Like, I felt the epicness of stories that I've consumed before. But it's so Filipino, laced with inspirations, and I love playing with perspective, and it plays with perspective, I think, in a really fulfilling way. Like, the way it ties timelines into each other. It's just a very well crafted piece of art. And it does that thing that I think is hard to do which is make an entertaining story that's entertaining in its own right. You choose to not engage with it on any level. You just want the story. But if you like engaging with your art and like really picking it apart, there's so much there. It is so lush and full of stuff to analyze and sink into. So I think that's a rare piece of art, I think. Because sometimes if you do too much of the other, then like the plot momentum is a little weird. And
yeah. Well, I'm happy to have a standalone, actually. It's sometimes a relief to get to a standalone. As much as I love my epic series and I'm involved in, I don't know how many series at the moment. I don't even want to
count them. It's not good for your mental health.
That's true. Oh, hey, I wanted to ask you too about something that I don't know much about, which is going to be embarrassing to admit on booktube, but you're active on Goodreads, right?
Relatively. I'm pretty bad at keeping up to date, but I try.
Okay. All right. So I just need someone who knows what Goodreads is to explain to me what Goodreads is.
Okay. So, I mean, I started using it in 2016 as just a reader. And it's just a place where there's a couple things you can do with it. But what I do is basically just mark when I've read a book and the rating I gave it. And now as a booktuber, I also will write like a tiny paragraph of my thoughts. But it's mostly for me, but also if I have a video link, I'll throw that in there. But other people also use it as like a way of live blogging or tracking what they're reading. So like when they start reading a book, they'll put it as currently reading and they'll update their progress and then maybe put in some thoughts. That's too much for me. I don't do that.
Uh-huh.
But I don't really use it a lot. It's not like actually social media, but it tries to be like it has a feed, but it's not a very useful feed. Like you can see
not a lot of exchange going on there.
No, and it's really hard to like there are people who have threads and you can make groups, but it's way worse than like what you can do on a Discord. It's really funky and not very good. And then if you want to comment on someone's review, it's really hard to reply to that comment. It just becomes like a comment thread with no like nesting. So it's like way worse than like if you're using Reddit or Discord or anything like that.
Interesting.
It's basically a piece of software that was made in 2009 and it hasn't really been updated since 2009.
It feels though that a lot of readers rely on Goodreads for recommendations and such. Am I right about that?
I do know people who will look at average ratings of a book to decide if they'll pick it up. I think that's it's not a thing that works for me because some of my favorite books of all time are like a 3.1. So and also like I mean, it can show you what I use it for sometimes because it is one of the only aggregates we have to show numerical probability other than sales numbers, which even that's kind of hard to like really pin down. So looking at the number of ratings books have, you can really see the disparity in popularity. So like I actually looked at this for Realm of the Elderlings, and this is how I knew people were skipping live ships so egregiously, because normally first book in the series gets the most ratings and then it tapers off. And then if there's another series in a series, that's going to be even lower. Right. But Realm of the Elderlings Farseer has what you expect, that trend. And then Live Ship's way lower. And then Tawny Man is like on the same level as Farseer. So there's like a whole bunch of people not reading Live Ship in like the general populace who use Goodreads, right? Like this is the who use Goodreads. So like
interesting.
That is numerically interesting when you're trying to figure out, well, was this book actually popular or was it just popular among the like 50 to 100 people I interact with on the internet?
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like it's useful for some things for sure.
Yeah. But I mostly, because I used it as just like a tracking website app, I use Storygraph now just because like for me, that's like very private. And I just like can be like, I read this book and I read this book and here's my rating and it's for my own tracking. Right. And it has stats for myself. Like so that's what I use. But like, I don't know, because otherwise I'd have to have my own spreadsheet, which I do have, but I am really bad at updating my spreadsheet.
Okay. Yeah, I would be terrible too. Yeah. Well, that was helpful. Thank you. I know there are people like Patrick who are,
I mean, that's how Patrick really got well known, was he's one of the top reviewers on Goodreads.
Yeah. So it's just something I need to be more aware of as somebody who has books coming out. I think I need to know more about Goodreads.
I mean, yeah. I do think from what I've heard about like other authors who, when their works get put on Goodreads, there is a lot that might not be in your hands. So best of luck, because sometimes the librarians aren't always your friends in a weird way.
Yeah, for example, I don't know how it happened exactly, but my first book was put on Goodreads. I didn't put it there.
Yeah, no, it's they like find you on Twitter and YouTube and stuff, and they
Okay,
just
so somebody put it there, but it was attributed to the wrong author. There was a guy, his real name is not Philip Chase. I don't know if he's alive or not still, but he was writing back in the 70s, and he took the name, for whatever reason, Philip Chase, for a pen name. And he wrote books like, I don't know what they all are, but one of them has the word Eden in it, Eden. And of course, my book is The Way of Eden. So I guess that's understandable that there would be some confusion, that these two Philip Chases would write books with sort of similar sounding titles, maybe. So
yeah,
anyway, my book was put in there under his name or something, I guess, but somebody's fixed it now, I think. So
yeah, having an author profile is actually useful because that's another thing. So like, I spend
okay,
a lot
so
of
I should
time.
do that, I guess,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's helpful, especially if you, I mean, you do have a Twitter, so that's like also kind of nice. But like when I'm trying to like learn at least bare minimum about an author for a book, the first places I look are like Twitter and Goodreads, just to see
Oh,
what they want me to know about them.
okay.
Mainly, it's usually for me trying to make sure I don't mess up people's pronouns, or if I am like referencing their ethnicity, if that's informative for the work that they're working on, like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, I only get to know what the author wants me to know, which is totally fair. But at least what they do know, I try to get right. What I
Yeah.
am given.
Yeah, that's good. That's smart. So I would be wise to at least, I didn't know you could do that. So you put an author profile
Yeah,
on.
you have to work on getting one. I don't know how. I don't write books, but there are you can get an
Okay.
author profile on
I'll
Goodreads.
ask Patrick. Patrick will know. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but that'll probably be useful. And then you can also probably put your link to your YouTube channel. I don't think you get that much traffic from Goodreads to YouTube, but it can't hurt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, certainly on YouTube, enough people have asked me, "Do you have a Goodreads?" over the last 3 years, and I've always said no. But I'm gonna have to change that answer, I think. Yeah. So.
Well, and I think a lot of that, and I say this as also a nosy person about my friends, and like there are a lot of flaws to a star rating system for sure. But at least when I know a person, I know what their star rating means. And whenever my friends stop star rating for a while, I'm like, you just told me you finished the book, but you didn't write anything down, you didn't post a video, and there's no star rating. So I have no idea what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's maybe because for a living, I have to grade people, so I don't like doing stars.
No, I mean, I think it's fair. It's just more like that's me being nosy of just like, that's why I like knowing people's Goodreads, because then I can be like quick and dirty. What did you think of this book? Have you read this book yet? Is even more useful because sometimes when some of my friends will ask me to recommend books, I'm like, well, I don't know what you've read and what you've liked. So I need to I'll like spend some time going through, seeing what worked and didn't work, and do a quick and dirty calculation of where our reading tastes overlap and what might work next.
Interesting. Of course, you can review a book on Goodreads without
a star rating. Yeah, you can just write words.
That would be me. That would please Alan immensely if I do that, because
yeah, you just say you read it and you put a bunch of words down. You can link a video if you made a video.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know. Okay, you can do all that. All right. Wow.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. It's so yeah, you could use it for sure without star ratings. 100%.
Okay, good. Then I can keep my my no star status.
Yeah.
And as opposed to people like Alan who are like star fairies, throwing stars around all over the place. So
I mean, we're in the book sphere. It's really not a serious space, right? Like I've always rated books just so I remember in the future. It's like really fascinating to look at books I rated a certain way in the past and be like, oh, so I was reading like this back then, and now I read like this now, and it's like an interesting look back. It's just for me. People find value of knowing what my star ratings are for reasons that are unknown to me, but for me, it's a good like capturing quick and dirty of like, what did I used to think of this work, and who was I as a reader back then? Because before booktube, everything got a 4 or 5 stars. Like the 3 star is probably more of a 1 star. Like I was just like, I can't rate. If I finish the book, it's at least a 3 star, right? Like
so it's like grade inflation. It's just star inflation. Yeah.
So it's just fascinating for me looking at myself, and it's like a interesting little thing.
How you think about books and how you analyze them. Yeah, that changes over the years too. Yeah, so cool. Well, thank you for that education. I appreciate that.
I'm hardly an expert, so feel free to, ask Patrick more questions.
Okay, yeah, I probably will. But thank you so much for everything today. Actually, I really enjoyed this discussion a lot. I've been looking forward to this ever since we arranged it, and I will be curious actually to hear, among the other things you talked about, I'll be curious to, whenever you resume your Malazan read, I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts as you go forward with Reaper's Gale, which is, there's some pretty amazing moments in that one, I would say. And if you do love your Bone Hunters, there are some pretty key moments in there for them as well.
Yeah, I need to rewatch yours and Jimmy's discussion of Bone Hunters, because I'm like, I need to remember what happened in the last book, and I don't have time to reread Bone Hunters. So
yeah.
I normally don't let this much time go between Malazan books, but life got a little hectic, and I need more brain than normal for Malazan books. So.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. So, but thank you so much. And everybody, if I will, of course, will have a link to Angela's channel, Literature Science Alliance, in the description. Go and check out all her wonderful, thoughtful content, and give her a, subscribe to her channel. Absolutely. One of the brilliant minds here on BookTube. And I really appreciate the perspective you offer too, Angela, as somebody who is very informed from, the science part of everything. You bring something really cool to your fantasy and science fiction reading, I think. So that is much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun. Great way to spend my Saturday.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, until next time.